Our speaker today is joyfully Tim Edwards, whom we all know as a long and dear friend of this congregation. His talk is Giving Back, It Takes a Village. Tim began his violin studies in Detroit public schools and has earned music degrees from the Eastman School of Music and the University of Michigan. He has performed with symphony orchestras in Toledo, Des Moines, Detroit, and presently in our own Jacksonville Symphony, as well as in jazz orchestras for such luminaries as Aretha Franklin and Sarah Vaughan. He is presently concertmaster of our own civic orchestra and serves 3 churches, along with teaching privately and teaching at the Kent campus of Florida State College. So I am so pleased to present my friend Tim Edwards.
Good morning. I stand a bit further back than some of the other people, so hopefully you can hear me. If you can't, I will bring myself forward more. To start off with, I'd like to say thank you for inviting me and putting up with me in this very different role than what we're used to. Once again, I'd like to say good morning to my UUCJ family. I do consider you my family. Sometimes communicating with family is fraught with the good and the less good. My name is Timothy Edwards, and I am an introvert. Though I can charge my batteries enough to perform for an audience, afterwards I must go and recharge them again. Performing for family brings out heightened trepidations. No one wants to, quote, mess up for family. Your family knows who you are, will probably see you again, and quite possibly will be sitting across from you at the dinner table. So having to speak publicly in front of a whole congregation of family is probably one of the reasons that I became an instrumentalist. An actor can put on a role and get into character. In many ways, this is a means of telling her or his own truth, but with deniability, as the words are flowing through the character they've created. In many ways, when a musician picks up an instrument, they are telling their own truth twice removed. Their truth is in their interpretation, filtered through the composer's efforts in writing the music, and then through the performer's instrument and or the limitations of their technique, which they weld to interpret the music. The way that we interpret music is our spirit speaking, and the distillation of the care, love, and investment of those that were willing to share of themselves to help mold that spirit. Thus, under the layers of music and how it is interpreted, you get a peek at the essence of the musician. I know that I've already thanked you for inviting me to speak before you this morning, but I also want to thank you for always being there for me, for listening to my music and giving of yourselves through your applause and kind words of encouragement. Those are the things that also recharge my batteries. It is that generosity on your part for which I am most grateful. Now, a bit more about myself. When I was in elementary school, I was chosen to sing a solo for my glee club. I'll never forget the experience. I was so scared, standing up in public, being exposed by having to sing a solo in front of the entire school and parents, that I accidentally, on purpose, turned off the microphone so that the entire piece had to be restarted with the mic on this time. After that, I sang the entire piece flawlessly, hitting all the high notes of "Have Yourself a Merry Little Christmas." The audience of parents rose to their feet, giving me a standing ovation, and that's when I realized that I had been betrayed by a good voice and an ear that could recognize and hold pitch. And probably by an overly proud mother, it is said that she was the first to stand up clapping to lead the ovation. When you are a child, your parents are superhuman. They are your protector and provider, your champion and encourager, and seem to always find a way to guide you and fix your boo-boos. When you see your parents as human beings with flaws of their own and without a playbook on how they were supposed to raise you, you experience the beginnings of adulthood. My mother was the minister of music at our church, Second Grace United Methodist Church on Tyerman Avenue in Detroit, Michigan. It was the church that my mother's father, a deacon at the church, mortgaged his home to pay for. Not only was she the minister of music, but also the church organist and choir director, and a public school vocal music teacher, having taught at all levels. The road to this career, however, was serendipitous. When she was of age, my grandfather, John T. Current, put her on a train to Atlanta, Georgia, with some deviled eggs, fried chicken, probably an entire one, and a note to the president of Clark College, the sister school of Morehouse. My grandfather wrote in part, "My name is John T. Current. I have been a faithful member, tither, and now deacon in the Methodist Church. Here, before you, is my daughter, Gloria Latricia Edwards, who wants to attend your college. She can sing and play piano. Please provide her a space and teach her well." They did indeed find her a space, give her work assignments to offset her tuition, taught her to play the organ, and started her on her journey as a teacher. So I now realize that watching her shy little boy sing a solo in public in front of all the gathered students and parents in attendance was part of the fulfillment not only of her dreams, but of the dreams of her parents as well. The generosity of my grandfather to give his all for his daughter's well-being and education, the grace, faith, and generosity of the Clark College administration and professors became distilled through my mother to me. I'll talk more about my ancestors later, but for now, more of my own story. Crystal, where's the off mic on this switch? No, I'm kidding. Anyway, I was about 5 years old when my mother started having me take piano lessons. Now, to give this some context, every child in the Edwards family had to play an instrument of some sort. My oldest brother, John, played the trumpet, my father's instrument. My sister, Gail, played the violin, and my brother, Lee, the middle brother and the one closest in age to me, played the cello. Lee tended to be the role model that I imprinted on more than others. So when it came time for me to choose an instrument in school, I chose the cello. However, before I was school age, my mother started me and my brother Lee on piano. She meant well. I thought that she thought I'd be good at piano because I would lay under the piano in our living room when she would practice, just to hear the sound coming from the harp, that big metal frame that held all the strings under high tension, and watch her feet move the pedals. I had a fascination with sound, particularly sustained sound, and could listen for hours to her piano practice while watching for when the sustaining pedal would go down. It was no different when I attended her choir practice and would sneak into the organ's pipe chamber to be in that space while the organ was being played, or when the carillon would start the service. I would also improvise on the piano in my childish way, playing chords and long meandering melodies that now they call New Age music and make a lot of money creating. I think it was my brother's aversion to piano lessons, the uninterested teacher that we had coming to the house, and my introversion, well, after all, the piano being in the living room where all my mistakes were exposed to the family, doomed that instrument as a viable instrument for me. By the time I got to about third grade in elementary school, and it became time for me to choose an instrument that I would play, I had a hard time starting in my, I had a hard time, I had a head start again in my brother, who was already in school and taking the cello. I loved the rich, deep tone that the instrument created and badly wanted to play the instrument he played. So I go to school, take the rudimentary ear test that was given at the time, which note is higher, which is lower, can you sing the pitch played, etc., and passed with flying colors. I was all ready to seek my reward when the teacher told me that there were no cellos available, but thought I'd be good on the violin. Well, of course, I felt cheated. I may have even thought that since my sister played the violin and my brother played the cello, that the violin was the girls' instrument, while the cello was meant for boys. So I begrudgingly took the girls' instrument home to start working on it. I quickly learned that I loved the violin, not for its gorgeous tone, but because I could play the violin in the basement by the potato bin, where it was nice and cool, and as long as my mother heard sound coming from the violin, she'd call my brother to do the last-minute chores, like taking out the garbage. I was safe, and my introversion was appeased. Later, as I got more proficient at the instrument, I began to realize the chess game aspects of the instrument, like how the left hand must get into place before the right hand makes a sound. Sometimes the act of the right hand following the left occurs in microseconds, but that muscle memory must be practiced and honed so that it is second nature. Understanding how the muscles of the body work together, hand and arm movement choreography, is vital to making the organized sound that we call music flow through the instrument. Once this understanding was revealed to me, I was off to the races. I started to become more and more proficient on the violin until one day, through the intercession of a colleague of my father's, I was introduced to Hortense Mishakov, the wife of the concertmaster of the Detroit Symphony, and my first real violin teacher. She was wonderful, inspiring, and instilled in me the spirit to become a violinist. So one day, I went to my mother and I said to her, "Mama, when I grow up, I want to be a musician." She thought about this and, shaking her head, replied, "Oh, honey, you can't do both." You'll get that in a minute. Nevertheless, despite her doubts, she encouraged me. One summer, she packed up the entire family to go with her while she took a seminar on the Kodai technique at Interlochen's National Music Camp, located just shy of Traverse City in northern Michigan. In her spare time while there, she showed me around the campus. I was also lucky enough to be immersed in the sounds coming from the campers because we were staying at the state park across the street from Interlochen's entrance and next to one of Interlochen's all-state division campsites. I realized that was the sound I wanted to be a part of, and making music with other people that were dedicated to making that collective sound would be my life's work. I don't know how my mother finagled the audition and managed to get me a scholarship to attend the Interlochen Arts Academy, but she did. Perhaps she told of her own adventures of getting to and into Clark College, but I was accepted into the academy despite the limited resources at my disposal, both musically at the time and probably financially on my parents' part. Somehow, in my child's mind, it makes sense that she may have retold the story of her own chicken and egg journey to Clark College and how she was accepted into one of the great Black educational institutions on a parental permission slip and faith. The administration, faculty, and staff of Interlochen were most gracious in their acceptance of me, and through their enormous generosity, in mentoring a young Black kid from Detroit in trying to navigate the daunting world of classical music performance molded me not only as a musician, but through their example as the kind of teacher that I am proud to be for my students today. When I worked as an adjunct professor in the humanities department at FSCJ, the Roosevelt campus, I taught a class on music appreciation. It helped me to solidify my beliefs that music, like so much of art, is intertwined with all aspects of life and therefore reflects the historical and cultural context in which it is created. In that sense, even musical markings that one would normally take for granted take on new meaning when applied to life outside of the musical realm. One of the things that draws me to music is the manipulation of time. At first, it was merely observing the ebb and flow, yin and yang, and a push and pull of time. To make a musical phrase breathe and release it from the confines of the cell that the composer has put it in, you need to have a good sense of the passage of time. One of the things that I tell my students who have some trepidation about performing in public is that one of the beauties of a musical performance is that once you start, it will inevitably end. It's over for better or worse. Within music itself, there is the idea of taking time from one place and giving it back in another. In music, we use the Italian term rubato, meaning to steal. When I think about this word, it often reminds me of how art imitates life and vice versa. Growing up, you hear a lot of family tales which shape your character. One such tale that I heard was of my grandparents. My grandfather, in his younger days, was a teamster. In those days, it meant that he carted supplies in a horse-drawn wagon. He met my grandmother, one of many daughters of a preacher, raised in all the cultural norms of a lady of her time, and they were wed. Later, they moved from Paris, Kentucky to Detroit, one of many thousands during the Great Migration of Blacks who left the South for a better life, certainly a less dangerous one, to other parts of the country. They finally settled in Detroit. In Detroit, my grandmother worked as a domestic, i.e., a maid in white households to make ends meet for her growing family. She washed, cleaned, and performed all around domestic chores. At one household she worked in, she would be toiling for what seemed like hours, and yet, when she looked at the mantel clock, those fancy clocks that were shaped like Napoleon Bonaparte's hat, she would see that only an hour or two had gone by. So she would continue to toil at her backbreaking work, once again eyeing the clock to see that only another hour had passed. Finally, after working an overly full day, she would get home and look at the clock only to find that her employer had been setting the clocks back and rubatoing her hours. To my surprise, I read the same story, or one remarkably similar, in a recent book on the migration of Blacks from the South. This wage theft was one of the things that, to my amazement, I read that other Blacks migrating from the South faced in the North when they tried to find work. What I didn't read in the book, however, was how my grandfather fixed the problem. My grandfather, deciding that this would never happen again to the one he loved and going out of his way to protect his family, decided he was going to study to become a gemologist. To my understanding, in those days, to own a watch selling and repairing shop, you had to know all about the ins and outs of gems and precious stones. At the time, no other Black person in Detroit owned a watch repair and retail business. My grandfather passed his exams, got certified, and became the first Black gemologist in Detroit. His watch shop, in its own small way, was successful enough for his young but growing family to move into a 2-story wooden house on Beechwood Avenue. Life is like rubato. When important things are taken from you, life finds a way of giving them back. And the act of being generous often unearths buried treasures within ourselves. With a family like my own, it is no wonder that I became a musician. Not only experiencing my mother's daily practice, my siblings' own meager efforts, choir rehearsals, and church services, all filled with music, but I also witnessed the profound effect of music to bring people together, allay their fears, and create a balm for hard days ahead. Another family member, my uncle, Gloucester Current, my mother's brother, was a jazz musician in his early days, and like Lionel Hampton, was a master of the xylophone and vibraphone. His lush improvisations would ring through the air at that wooden house on Beechwood Avenue. Later, he became the general secretary of the NAACP. One of his jobs, and to our fledgling family, the most dangerous, was his need to take funds raised in the North to help Blacks in the South continue the fight for civil rights. These trips were fraught with dangers. Dangers in the form of sundown laws that declared Blacks had to be out of the city limits by the time the sun set. Perceived dangers of where in the car you could sit to keep from looking suspicious if a white person was accompanying you. Dangers of where you could eat and sleep, and of course, the great danger that any hint that you were an outside agitator from the North, riling up the peaceful Black folk of the South, could be met with death. His job was vital, though, for furthering the cause, and thus he had to make the Southern trek. On one such trip, he brought funds and exchanged information with the leader of the struggle in Jackson, Mississippi, and had fellowship with him and his family before he safely made it out of town and eventually back to home in the North. The next day, that Southern leader, Medgar Evers, was assassinated. So the evening visuals my family would hold in that house on Beechwood were filled with praying, testifying, beseeching, and what I remember most, the music. Utilizing the same piano in my grandparents' living room that my mother must have begun her studies on, they played Negro spirituals, Methodist hymns, field shouts and hollers, and any other means that could be brought to bear to protect my uncle on his mission and deliver him safely back to the loving bosom of his family. It was truly powerful, and I must believe that it was effective in getting him back from the South on more than one occasion, a reverse Harriet Tubman. Early on in my story, I mentioned that a colleague of my father introduced me to the concertmaster of the Detroit Symphony. It was this concertmaster, Misha Mishakov, that suggested I study with his wife, Hortense, in anticipation and preparation for eventually studying with him. Well, colleague is probably too grandiose a word to use. My father and he were co-workers at the main post office in Detroit, and my father knew that his co-worker, Audrey Fillinganes, was an accomplished amateur violinist and asked for his help. Later in life, Mr. Fillinganes was going blind, and as I had spent at least 1 or 2 years at Interlochen by then, asked me to help him learn a piece for him to perform at the very exclusive music club that they had for the people who lived in the posh suburb of Grosse Pointe, Michigan. I drove him to the venue, helped him get prepared, and sat in the audience to listen to his performance, much like an expectant father wondering what was going to come out and hoping that it would sound like something that we, me in working hard to impart skills learned, and him in memorizing the music of the composer, we both diligently created. Well, his performance, from a musical standpoint, was awful. Not only were there a lot of note and pitch mistakes, but trying to learn a composer's work, not being able to see the actual notes written, can create a performance fraught with memory slips. Needless to say, all those things happened during this performance. We left with me feeling very bad for him, but trying to lift his ego, which I thought must be shattered. It wasn't until years later that I considered the possibility that Mr. Fillinganes didn't perform in that hallowed hall to get recognition for his own playing ability, but rather as a citizen of that suburb to integrate that venue and show that Blacks were capable of being a part of the musical scene that seemingly the whites of Grosse Pointe felt comfortable hoarding exclusively for themselves. Someone must be the first, and I know that I journey on a path that the generosity of strong men and women who trod before me made smoother. Well, I am not exactly sure whether I met the requirements of those who wanted me to speak about my life in music and or how I became a musician and what that means to me. Ultimately, I believe that musicians and artists do what we do because we have a profound need to create beauty, to try and replicate the type of beauty that we see all around us, that was given to us for our enjoyment, and to try to give back some of that beauty to the world, a sort of rubato to life. At my age now, I've had a long career filled with the most wonderful concert halls in the US and Europe, the ability to make music in several different genres with different ensemble configurations. I've had the ability to make music with a multitude of artists, both famous and lesser so, but almost all that I respect. Someone asked a famous cellist, why does he keep practicing? And his reply was that he thought he was getting better. It reminds me of the old joke. What's the difference between a dog and a violinist? The answer? A dog knows when to quit scratching. At this stage in my career, my desire is to give back to my community, still to create, still to make music, but with a greater emphasis on bringing joy to the listener, to help them find peace, solace, provide them with a space to remember, and help them to recharge their batteries so they can go back out into the world a bit more renewed than they were before they heard me play. I always pray before I play for a congregation that I can help enhance whatever message or lesson is being presented, that I can be a balm to their soul, and that I can help in whatever small way possible recharge their spirit. I have been blessed in this endeavor by wonderful colleagues and collaborators like Jeannie Hebner that always make me look good. I continue to teach violin in my private studio, teaching preschoolers, students attending the La Villa School of the Arts, those attending the Douglas Anderson School of the Arts, and those that have gone on to colleges and universities majoring in music and or continuing to be active in the field. Even though, knowing the sacrifices it entails, I have mixed feelings about whether students should endeavor to go into music as a career, I still try to make sure that my students have all the tools needed in their toolbox, not only to be good violinists, but good musicians, also to be good people. Ultimately, no matter what field you go into, with dedication, hard work, and empathy for yourself and others, you can turn the work you do in that field into an art. Hopefully, sharing your talents with your community to enhance it and make it better. Just this year, I signed a contract to become the concertmaster of the Civic Orchestra of Jacksonville. I still love playing in that sound created by a full orchestra. And I guess, like that old joke, I don't know when to stop scratching. Regardless, I hope that people touched by my music and thus my spirit find my memory to be a blessing. Thank you, my family. I know that you'll love me despite this.